Hello and welcome to the CPA Ontario Practical Experience webinar on preparing for your completion professional assessment. This webinar is developed for CPA students in the PPR and EV route. In the handout section of this webinar, you will find practical experience resource links, the guide to completing experience verification reports, the rubric for enabling competencies, the quick reference guide for PERT tasks, and a copy of this presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to all registrants approximately 10 business days after the event. There will be some time for questions throughout the webinar and possibly at the end of the webinar. If we do not answer your question directly, you will be responded to via direct email. My name is Heather. I am an officer of the CPA Ontario Practical Experience team, and I review and approve experience reports from experience verification students. Today, I'm joined by Farheen, another officer of the CPA Ontario Practical Experience team, who reviews and approves experience from both experience verification and pre-approved program students. We also have the Practical Experience team here to answer your questions. Let's begin. We will break the process of preparing for completion into 6 steps. I will take you through each step. The first step is to ensure you have reviewed the CPA Practical Experience completion requirements. There are a few concepts you should be familiar with for the technical competencies: core, depth, and breadth requirements, progression and proficiency levels. And at completion, you need to have demonstrated how you've progressed to level 2 proficiency in a minimum of 4 technical subcompetency areas and a level 2 proficiency in all enabling competencies. The first requirement is depth. At completion, you must demonstrate depth in one area. To demonstrate depth, you must have gained proficiency in all the subcompetency areas with a minimum of 2 subcompetencies at a level 2, with the others at a level 1. For example, if we look at finance, to achieve depth, you could have a level 2 in Finance 1 and Finance 2 and a level 1 in Finance 3. Now let's talk about the core requirement. To meet the core requirement, you must gain proficiency in any 3 subcompetencies in financial reporting and/or management accounting to at least a level 1 proficiency. There can be overlap between depth and core as long as you have met the correct level of proficiency. For example, you could have a depth in financial reporting by having 2 level 2s and 2 level 1s. This would also meet the core requirement. If your depth is in finance, for example, you would need to achieve 3 level 1s in any of the 8 financial reporting or management accounting competency areas, for example, FR1, FR2, and MA2. This would meet the core requirement. Finally, breadth. To achieve breadth, you need to ensure that you have gained proficiency in at least 8 subcompetencies. In total, at completion, you need 4 level 2s and 4 level 1s. If we go back to our financial reporting example, to ensure you have met the breadth requirement, you would need to achieve 2 additional level 2s and 2 additional level 1s in any of the other 7 competency areas. It is okay for core, depth, and breadth to overlap. Notice that under the 6 categories, there are 20 sub-areas. You do not need to meet all 20. You only need the minimum of 8, as long as you're meeting the core, depth, and breadth requirements. Please do not populate all 20 subcompetency areas. The CPA experience requirements provide significant flexibility, enabling a wide variety of experience to be recognized. Now that you are nearing or at completion, you need to be clearly demonstrating in your descriptions that you are involved in decision-making and problem-solving, and that your work is increasing in complexity and autonomy, and that you are involved in some non-routine circumstances. We view this as demonstrating progression. When we review your completion assessment, we are looking at it from the perspective of whether you are demonstrating that you have the skills and experience of a newly certified CPA, and you need to ensure that you are clearly demonstrating this proficiency in your final report. I will now turn things over to Farheen, who will take you through the technical competency components of preparing your final experience report.
Thank you, Heather. Now that you understand the practical experience exit requirements, you're ready to complete your final experience report. If you at least have 30 months duration, have met the core, breadth, depth, and progression, have self-assessed and completed experience reports on a semi-annual basis, and had meetings with your mentor and documented in PERT, you're ready to complete your last experience report. What are some of the things you need to consider when you are working on your last and final experience report? You need to self-reflect on the last 6 months or since your last experience report and self-assess on the competencies that you've had exposure to during that period. Do not be overly aggressive when self-assessing yourself. Remember that you only need 4 level 1s and 4 level 2s to meet the exit requirements. If you are in a pre-approved program, pay close attention to the target proficiencies that are laid out in PERT. Those are the proficiencies that were determined when your program was pre-approved. So unless you were doing something quite different from what the map was designed for, you should be in alignment with the map. If you're an experience verification student, you should pay close attention to the guidance under the blue question mark icon when you're documenting your report. Think about the focus of your role and document only in competencies that apply to your role. Secondly, you need to self-assess and document all enabling competencies that you gained during that period. Remember, as Heather pointed out, all enabling competencies have to be at level 2 at the completion stage. The enabling competency grid is a great resource for you to determine if you're documenting the CPA way and if your documentation has met the requirements for a level 2 proficiency. You should take your time with the enabling competencies and ensure that your documentation is up to the CPA standards. As if not, the reviewer will put the assessment in follow-up, and it will take another 4 to 6 weeks for review once you resubmit. We will go through enabling competencies later on in the presentation to walk you through some of the do's and don'ts. Ensure that you have entered in your leaves for your entire practical experience period. CPA students are allowed up to 20 weeks of leaves for 30 months of practical experience. An allowance of up to 20 weeks of time away from work for any reason, including vacation, sickness, professional development, or study time is permitted within the calculation of the 30 months term of experience. Time away from work in excess of 20 weeks will be added to the duration requirement. Once you have done all of the above, go to the Consolidated Summary tab. Check off all the reports on the square box on the left of all the reports and click Assess. This will help you determine if you have met all the requirements. I wanted to take a few moments to go over the technical competencies and the things that you should keep in mind to ensure that you are addressing all the things that you need to address to support your self-assessed proficiency levels. Please note that this part of the presentation is mainly for experience verification students, as pre-approved program students would mainly be following the map for their own specific program. In financial reporting, the main things that the reviewer wants to know in most sub-areas are: who are your stakeholders and what is the purpose of the reporting? How often do you do something? So if you're preparing financial statements, do you do it on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis? How many times have you prepared the statements? What sections do you work on, and do you prepare the notes to the statements as well? Remember that to attain a level 2, the reviewer is looking for complexity in your task. Give clear examples of the accounting policies, journal entries, financial statement sections that you worked on, the judgment areas and accounting guidance that you used, and what made it complex. Also, make sure that you look at the requirements of the specific competency, and if there are multiple requirements demonstrated by plus, please address all of them in your own words. For instance, financial reporting needs and systems. There are 3 specific requirements: identification of the stakeholders, plus their information requirements, plus what steps did you take to ensure the information was reliable and accurate. Most students overlook the last requirements in their documentation. For management accounting, we want to ensure that the information that you're preparing is for internal decision-making purposes and it is forward-looking information. If not, your task might belong in financial reporting. Once again, you need to ensure that you're addressing all of the requirements. For management accounting needs and systems, if you are working on improvements to the process or system, ensure that you provide a couple of clear, concise examples of your work to support your competency. especially if you're assessing it at a level 2. For planning, budgeting, and forecasting, the reviewer wants to see frequency and complexity. Just documenting that you prepared the budget or sections of the budget is not sufficient information. You need to document which sections of the budget, how do you evaluate the reasonableness of the inputs, what judgment factors are used for your evaluation, and how many times have you prepared the budget or forecast. In finance, the first finance sub-area, financial analysis and planning, is often confused with financial statement analysis or management accounting. Think about the purpose of your analysis to determine which competency it belongs in. Financial analysis and planning is more focused on long-range scenario analysis and sensitivity analysis that would impact the entity's financial state. For this competency, it is important to provide examples to support the complexity of the analysis that you did. For treasury management, a lot of students just document the fact that they're preparing the cash flow and managing the working capital. However, you need to address the second requirement as well, which is to analyze and recommend what to do with the excess cash or review financing or investing options for your organization. For capital budgeting, the most common misconception is that it is preparing a budget for capital items. That is not the case. It is analyzing and evaluating the feasibility of a capital project and would include metrics like the net present value analysis, discounted cash flows, etc. Finally, audit and assurance and taxation. Generally, as a rule of thumb, audit and assurance competencies are for students in an internal or an external audit department. Also, for these two competencies, as well as financial reporting, if you're an experienced verification student and you're working in a firm environment, you need to submit your chargeable hours if you're self-assessing yourself at a level 2 for any sub-areas within financial reporting, audit and assurance, or taxation. To summarize, we would like to go through some helpful tips that you should keep in mind. Keep the exit requirements in mind. Considering that you only need 4 level 1s and 4 level 2s, do not attempt to document and self-assess on any more than 8 to 10 competencies for your practical experience, and only focus on the competencies that you have had exposure to during that period. Think about the purpose of your task and document it in the right competency. We have resources such as past webinars and guidance under the blue question mark icon, and other resources in the student resources section on our website, which will guide you in determining which competency your task belongs in. Reviewers will check to see that each competency is supported by a unique set of position duties. Carefully review the competency requirements and examples that have been provided to see where your job duties fit best. The reviewer needs to understand from your description what you performed as an individual. Avoid using phrases such as, my team performed, my company did, I assisted with, and I'm able to. Clearly state what task you completed on your own, even if your work was reviewed. As mentioned multiple times before, you need to address all the requirements in the competency. If there are multiple requirements within one sub-area, it will be noted as plus to indicate that you have to meet all those requirements. You cannot document the same task in more than one competency area. And last but not least, refer to the blue question mark icon on the right-hand side of each competency to understand and address the requirements of that competency sub-area. Now, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Heather, who will walk you through the enabling competencies.
The next piece is enabling competencies. By the end of the 30 months, students are required to hit a level 2 in all 5 of the noted competencies. When reflecting and documenting your responses, I would like to draw your attention to the rubric that is located in the blue question mark icon on the enabling page. This will show you what the reviewers are expecting to see for a level 2. Students must continue to document until they have achieved a level 2 in all enabling competencies. CPA Ontario also relies on your mentor to support your development of your enabling competencies. Enabling competencies are the increasingly important soft skills which set CPAs apart from other professional designations. We have a few expectations. We expect at this stage that you are able to clearly and concisely document an understanding of the situation you are reporting in the enabling competency section of your report. As an example, it is important to ensure that your response to Part C identifies your awareness of continuous improvement and development. There should always be something you could do differently to improve the outcome the next time you are in a similar situation. Remember that a stranger is reading your report. Ensure your language is professional and clear, and that you have proofread your response for spelling and grammar. Think of it like an interview. We don't know you. We're assessing your response only, and you have one chance to make a good impression on us. A common issue that we come across is lack of content. Sometimes your responses are too short. To help the reviewer assess your responses at a level 2, ensure that your responses are detailed. One-sentence answers cannot support a level 2 self-assessment. You must explain to the reviewer, using the CPA way, how you have demonstrated the enabling competencies. Ideally, the reviewer can see your progression from level 1 in your earlier reports to a more thoughtful and objective response that supports a level 2. Another common issue is not using the rubric. We commonly note that students are answering questions very briefly, and they're not using the rubric to form their response. Remember, we use the rubric to assess your response. It is in your best interest to use this guidance to formulate a strong level 2 response to the questions. To achieve a level 2, you need to demonstrate clearly the CPA value impacted. You need to provide us with more than one possible solution. You need to document your analysis of each alternative and ensure that you are supporting your conclusion with clear and concise decision-making. Equally important, as mentioned, is that you are able to identify some learning points for the future. There is always something that can be improved upon. This is the Enabling Competencies rubric. Here you can see the values or behaviors that a CPA should be demonstrating. The rubric explains how a student at a level 0, 1, or 2 would be expected to answer these questions. The rubric can be accessed by clicking on the blue information icon at the top of the reflective questions section of your experience report. Farheen will now take you through the supervisor and mentor review process.
Thank you, Heather. Before we move on to the next part of the presentation, we would like to take a few questions that we have been getting from our students.
So we had a question that's been asked a few times, which if a student has finished all of their 30 months but hasn't yet written the CFE, should they go and submit that final profession assessment now or wait until they've written the CFE?
That is a very good question. So if you have not finished your education requirements and you have not written the CFE as of yet, it should not stop you from submitting your practical experience. As long as you have met all the practical experience requirements that we have gone through, you have your core, depth, breadth, progression in your duties, you have a minimum of 30-month duration, and chargeable hours if it's applicable to you. Regardless of whether you have written and passed the CFE, you are able to submit your last completion profession assessment for your practical experience, and you are able to complete your practical experience before you finish the CFE. Now we are going to review the final step before you submit a completion assessment. Once you have prepared your last experience report, it is time to review your report along with the technical and enabling competencies. For experience verification students, your supervisor would review the factual accuracy of your report. Once the supervisor has reviewed and verified the factual accuracy of the report, you should request a mentor meeting and discuss your report, specifically your enabling competencies, with your mentor. Both students in the experience verification as well as a pre-approved program environment need to have their last mentor meeting before they submit a profession assessment. Finally, you would submit a completion assessment. I'd like to go through the process specifically for experience verification student and pre-approved program students separately, as there are some differences. As mentioned, when you have prepared your last experience report, it is time to review your report with your technical and enabling competency and get it reviewed by your supervisor. Your supervisor would verify and review the factual accuracy of your report. Once you have obtained supervisor verification of your experience report, you would do that by clicking submit on each experience report. Once the supervisor has reviewed and verified the factual accuracy, you should request a mentor meeting and discuss your report, specifically your enabling competencies, with your mentor. You would update your experience report as required based on your mentor meeting discussions. Ensure that your mentor documents a summary of your discussion in PERT and mark the meeting completed. Important things to check before you submit your assessment are semi-annual mentor meetings. Did you have your meetings every 6 months and documented in PERT? Are your enabling competencies documented the CPA way? Are your leave times documented for each experience report? And your summary of chargeable hours if it is applicable to you. For pre-approved program student, the process is that once you have prepared your last experience report, you need to select submit to update the report to a verified status. Then you need to request a mentor meeting and discuss your report, specifically your enabling competencies, with your mentor. Similar to experience verification student, you need to have your last mentor meeting before you submit the profession assessment. Update your experience report as required based on your mentor meeting discussions, and ensure that your mentor documents a summary of your discussion in PERT. Before you submit your profession assessment, you should navigate to the Consolidated Summary tab, check off all the reports, and click Assess. This summary will show you if all the requirements have been met. Then you should submit your profession assessment. Choose completion as the reason for your assessment. Please note that every time you submit a profession assessment or you make changes after the reviewer has done their initial review and you resubmit your assessment, it takes CPA Ontario 4 to 6 weeks to process that assessment. This is a snapshot of the consolidated summary. When you are submitting your assessment, make sure that you run the consolidated summary. And if your consolidated summary shows met for enabling as well as the breadth, depth, and core requirements for the technical competencies, as well as your duration, you have met the requirements. This part of the consolidated summary is specifically important for pre-approved program student. When you run the consolidated summary and you click on the plus sign to expand on the sub area of a particular competency, you will see that the target proficiency, which is the proficiency that was set for the pre-approved program. As a student in a pre-approved program, you should be aligned with the technical competencies as laid out in the map. There might be some rare cases when a student's experience is significantly different from the pre-approved map, but for the most part, your self-assessment should align with the target proficiencies. Once you have submitted your completion report, you are excited. We at CPA Ontario understand that. However, it is important to be aware that your completion process takes time. If you're wondering what happens to your assessment after you submit that completion assessment, here's a brief summary. Once you submit your completion assessment for pre-approved program student, this will first go to your pre-approved program leader for their declaration. Then it will come to CPA Ontario and you will be assigned to a reviewer. An officer will do the initial review of your assessment within 4 to 6 weeks. Please note that all reports are reviewed at the completion stage to ensure that you have met the exit requirements, and no reports are final until they have been approved by the director who does the final approval. After the officer review, there might be questions even on previously reviewed report. The officer might need to put the report into follow-up back into your court so that you can make the necessary changes. After you have addressed the officer's questions and concerns, the officer will send your assessment to the director. There might be some more follow-up questions at that point. When the assessment is approved, you will receive a congratulatory email that your practical experience requirements have been met. The file then goes to registration and admissions team who review other requirements for your admission, and they would send you the admission to membership form in 4 to 6 weeks. This brings us to the end of our presentation. In the next slide, we have a few great resources that you would be able to utilize through your practical experience journey. Thanks very much for logging in, and we would be taking some questions at this point that the students have sent in.
All right, so we've got some questions about the enabling reports and, the enabling competencies, and specifically if students are able to wait until the final report to indicate any enabling competencies they've had exposure to, or do they need to include those in the reports leading up to the final report as well?
So it's better to document your enabling competencies on an ongoing basis. Remember, this is part of your discussions with your mentor throughout the 30 months that you're gaining your practical experience. As well, it allows us to see how you've progressed to the level 2, and it allows us to give you feedback on each report as you're documenting your enabling competencies.
Just to add to that, if you are, it is very important that you do document it on a progressive basis, because it also enables your mentor to review it with you on a semi-annual basis and give you their feedback on the enabling competencies that you might need to work on, or things that you might need to explore to get that progression in your enabling competency development.
And in terms of these, so a couple questions that came around the 30-month requirement. So one was about the EVR route and how long they have to complete the 30-month requirement.
So when you hear the 30 months duration, the 30 months is the minimum duration that you need to complete your practical experience requirement. However, experience verification students can take more than 30 months to complete their practical experience requirement. A couple of things to keep in mind, though, is you need to finish your practical experience requirement within the last 7 years if you are not an external audit student. For external audit students, it is a 5-year requirement. You need to complete your practical experience requirements as well as chargeable hours within the last 5 years. That would only apply to pre-approved program external audit students. Also, you need to complete your entire journey within 10 years of the date that you registered as a student. So those are some of the currency requirements and duration requirements that you need to keep in mind.
All right, and in terms of mentor reviews, we've talked about the fact that 2 are required for every 12 months, but what if I don't have that? What happens and what should I do?
Especially at the completion stage, the reviewer will check for if you had your mentor meetings on a timely basis. If we see that your mentor meetings were not done on a timely basis, there will be a penalty of 1 month additional duration for every missed mentor meeting. If you all recall, there was communication sent out around May 31st to do catch-up mentor meeting documentation for all meetings that had happened in the past but were not documented in PERT. After that point, if you have not had your mentor meetings, there will be a penalty, and that penalty will be applied when you submit your completion.
So jumping back to technical competencies, if a student wants to progress from a level 1 to a level 2, how many different examples of tasks do they need to include to be able to get up to a level 2?
This is a very subjective question that can depend on the competency, on how much documentation was done to support the level 1, the job description, the job that the student is in. But generally, choose your examples wisely. You want to give examples of the complex stuff that you've worked on, but also stuff that you have done on a frequent basis. There is no magic number to how many examples that you can provide to go from a level 1 to a level 2, but we are looking generally for at least a couple, 2 to 3 clear demonstrative examples of the work that you did that would represent that the work that you do in your normal day-to-day operations.
All right, thank you. And in terms of the prior experience, if a student does have experience prior to their per effective date that they've included in a prior report, when will that report be approved by the profession?
The prior report can be approved as soon as you are in a current role and you have started a current experience report. You can submit your prior report to be reviewed and approved. That is the only limitation to reviewing, to getting your prior report reviewed. Your prior can be up to 12 months of prior experience before the per effective date, and you can submit it as soon as you're in a current relevant role and you have started a current experience report.
So some students have spoken about how when they've submitted their report and they get them back, they see they've been downgraded from a level 2 to a level 1, for example. If that happens, and specifically for the enabling competencies, will they have a chance to rewrite their responses?
When students submit their completion assessment and they self-assess themselves, the reviewer will go in, they'll look at the documentation. In terms of the enabling competency, your documentation will be compared to the enabling competency grid to see if you have met all the requirements for a level 2 response. If you have not met the requirements for a level 2 response, usually if you're at the completion stage, the reviewer will give you one chance to fix your documentation. The report will be put into a follow-up and you will be asked to address the level 2 requirements. And most times the reviewer will send you specific guidance in the enabling competencies on what things you need to address. So you are given that chance to fix your documentation and make sure that you are meeting the level 2 requirements. And it's strongly recommended that you look at the enabling competency video, which has examples of a level 2 response. Look at the enabling competency grid before you go and redocument your response and resubmit your profession assessment.
So again, back to the mentor reviews, that the reports that students are doing to meet with their mentor about, perhaps they've met the mentor review requirement of having at least 2 meetings a year, but what about the number of reports? Is there a required number of reports that are needed in PERT? And I think this is getting at whether you can have separate reports versus one report throughout your experience.
This is a very good question, and it's come up quite often. Students actually have the option to either continue to build on the same report or do a separate report every 6 months. Sometimes certain employers, certain pre-approved programs, or certain mentors will have a specific preference, and the student might want to work in accordance with that preference. But from a CPA Ontario perspective, students do have the option to go either way, and whatever they find more efficient, they can either keep on building on the same report, or they can create a separate report for every 6 months.
Perfect. And I think you may have spoken earlier about the fact that you can't sort of double dip in terms of a task. You can't include one task in multiple competencies, but is it okay to use that same task in both a technical competency and an enabling?
Yes, you can definitely use the same task in the technical and enabling competency. Your focus and your perspective of documentation would be very different for sure. In technical competency, you are trying to prove the complexity of the task, you're trying to prove exactly what you did, whereas in enabling competency, your focus would be on the enabling competency itself, whether it be communication or teamwork. So what you got out of that experience and what you learned from that experience would be a very different documentation when it comes to enabling or technical, but you can definitely use the same example.
Perfect. And back to a mentor review question. If a student happens to complete their 30-month requirement at a time in between the 6-month mentor review period, should they have another mentor review before submitting their final profession assessment request? Is this required?
What is required is mentor meetings on a semi-annual basis at around the 6-month mark. If you do have more frequent meetings or you have a meeting right before you submit your completion assessment, yes, definitely it's best practice to document that meeting in part. And document the results of that meeting in part. If we see that the mentor has documented right before the student submitted a completion assessment that the student is doing well in their enabling competencies, that in their opinion they've met the technical competencies, it definitely goes a long way. So best practice is definitely to document all your mentor meetings in part, even if it's more than the required amount.
All right, and in terms of enabling competencies again, if a student has already achieved a level 2 in one report, can they then just copy and paste the response into a future report, or is that needed?
You do not have to copy the response into a future report. Once you have your level 2 in your enabling, you can just leave those areas blank if you choose. You can choose to update it, but you do not have to. We will go back and look at it in the earlier report when we review your completion report.
All right, and from a technical competency perspective, if a student has met certain competencies in one role, and then they change roles and they achieve different competencies in that role, will their initial competencies carry forward? Did they lose those, or do they carry forward with them? So if they've already met a depth, for instance, in their previous role, would that carry forward for them into their new role?
Technical competencies will carry forward if you have attained a depth in one role. When we look at your submission of completion, we will look at what you have attained to date. You will not lose the technical competencies that you have already attained. However, if you have attained a level 1 in certain sub areas and you are not doing the same task anymore, you obviously won't be able to progress in those areas if your task or your job is completely different from your last one. But you will not lose what you've already attained.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, perhaps from a pre-approved program perspective, because this comes up a lot where we hear students switch from one pre-approved program to another close to the end of their practical experience. And a lot of times those pre-approved program contacts will come to us saying, what am I supposed to do? Because if a student has experience or competencies from a previous employer and it's different. So for example, if a student was working, let's say, in audit at one program, and then they go to a different firm and now they're working in tax, how does that employer get comfort over those initial audit competencies? So it's more something to keep in mind, I guess, that it does put a lot of onus on your new employer to have to sign off on those competencies. At the very end of your program, they're saying that you've now met all the requirements and are ready to complete your practical experience. So it really is highly encouraged to try to, if possible, finish off a program, especially if you're right near the end, as opposed to switching programs at the very last minute. Just be aware that it does put a lot of onus onto that new employer. Okay. So please do keep your questions coming. We're just going through the ones that are coming in to see which ones we can share with as a group. A question from a student in the EVR route. Can the supervisor and mentor be the same person?
Yes, the supervisor and mentor can be the same person as long as the mentor is a CPA. Your supervisor does not have to be a CPA, but your mentor does. So if that fits in your situation, it's fine to have that be the same person.
All right, and another one for prior experience. So this comes from an EVR student, and they have 24 months of experience prior to their per effective date. are they able to get all of those months recognized?
No, you can only have a maximum of 12 months of prior EV recognized. And it would be your most current 12 months that would be recognized.
There was also a question on prior experience earlier, and I had forgotten to mention that for prior experience, it is 12 months, and also you can only go back 5.5 years. So if your prior experience is before 5.5 years, you would not be able to include that because it's not eligible, and it's almost too old to get recognized in your practical experience.
And I believe you both covered this earlier as well, but as a reminder, how long is the review process once someone submits a profession assessment request?
So the review process, once you submit an assessment, and for pre-approved programs, it's once the your assessment has been submitted and it has been signed off by a program leader. Once it comes to us, it is 4 to 6 weeks. Usually by 6 weeks, you will either get your assessment in follow-up with further things that we need to be clarified, further documentation that needs to be done, or you would get a final result on your assessment.
All right, there's been a lot of questions about public accounting and licensure. So I wasn't sure if you could just, I know there's a lot of details involved in this, but perhaps more high level, which routes are eligible for public accounting, the requirements, if it can be gained after they become a member once they finish their practical experience.
So the only route that is eligible for public accounting, the only student practical experience, is when you are in an external audit pre-approved program. If you are a student in an external audit pre-approved program, there are certain requirements for completion, which include your chargeable hours. You need 2,500 chargeable hours, of which 1,250 hours have to be in assurance, 625 hours have to be in audit, 100 in review, and 100 in tax. You also need 2 years or 24 months under the supervision of a licensed public accountant. Those are all the requirements for completing your experience in an external audit pre-approved program. If you complete your practical experience under an external audit pre-approved program, you are eligible to obtain your licensure upon membership. It is a separate process from practical experience. So once you receive your membership, you would apply separately for licensure, but only external audit students are eligible for licensure upon membership. If you have not taken that path and you're not an external audit pre-approved program, you can obtain your license as a member. You would have to meet the licensure requirements as a member. So most of the same requirements would apply, which is the 24 months under the supervision of a licensed public accountant, certain threshold of chargeable hours, but you would be getting those requirements when you become a member.
All right, thank you. And in terms of the mentor reviews, is there a base number where every student needs 5 mentor reviews, or would that depend on prior experience, for example?
That would really depend. The requirement is that you need a mentor review for every 2 mentor reviews for every 12 months of current experience. So if you have 12 months of prior experience, let's say, you would probably need about 3 mentor reviews. If you are a legacy student and you have done catch-up reporting and you would have probably followed the RQE process for that, this is only for CA legacy student, you would not need mentor reviews for that period of time. So really the way to look at it is if you go to your consolidated summary and you run your current experience reports, for all the months in your current experience report, you have a mentor meeting for every 6 months of current experience. It can and is in a lot of cases less than 5. It would only be 5 if all 30 months of your current experience are all 30 months are in current experience.
All right, so we've talked about whether or not you need to carry forward enabling responses from one report to another, but what about technical? If someone's already achieved a technical proficiency level in one report, do they need to continue updating those in future reports if they're, still at a level 1 or level 2, for example?
You should be updating for your report for any new experiences or any exposure that you have attained to that technical competency for that period of time. It might be that you stay at the same level. It might be that it's a progressive experience, so you might be able to move to a level 2. But if there is any technical competency that you have attained exposure to, regardless of whether you have achieved that level 1 or level 2 already, you should be documenting that in your report.
For mentor reviews, what should my mentor be documenting in the comment section of the mentor review box? Is it okay if they just say, agreed or we met, or should they be providing more detail?
They should be providing more detail. If the mentor meeting occurred on a different date from when the mentor meeting was requested, they should be stating the date of the meeting. They should be giving a brief summary of the outcome of the meeting, what was discussed, what competencies were discussed, what outcome, if there were any next steps that they had recommended, they should be mentioning that as well.
Is my final experience approved by CPA Ontario only during certain times of year, certain months, or is it done at any time of year?
It's done at any time of year. Just like any other assessment, it goes into our queue and it gets divvied up and someone reviews it. And for completion, it also has an extra step of being reviewed by the director. And that happens 5 days a week. We look at them.
Except for your statutory holidays at Christmas time.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
All right, we spoke earlier about technical competencies being decreased by the reviewer at CPA Ontario. So, if you had assessed yourself at a level 2 and then it gets decreased to a level 1 after it's been reviewed, what would be some of the reasons as to why this would happen?
Some of the usual reasons why that would happen for technical competencies are, one is that you do not have sufficient experience in that role. So let's take financial statement preparation. Let's say you have only prepared that for one quarter end. That is not sufficient experience to get a level 2. Another reason would be that from the documentation that you've provided and from your job description, the reviewer doesn't believe that you have sufficient complexity in your role. So, for accounting policies and transactions, maybe you've self-assessed yourself at a level 2, but the transactions that you have mentioned in your documentation are more routine and simple transactions instead of more complicated transactions. Another reason would be that it might just be your documentation. You have not addressed everything that needed to be addressed for a level 2 proficiency. Another thing that we look at is the autonomy of your task. If you are performing a task as part of a team, but your own individual contribution is not of an autonomous nature, that might lead the reviewer to believe that you're not at a level 2 proficiency as well. Usually when a reviewer will bump you down from a level 2 to a level 1, there will be reviewer comments explaining to why they believe that you are at a level 1. Heather, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to add that sometimes at completion, in preparing for completion and preparing for the director's review, a reviewer might mark you down to give you the opportunity to add additional information to support your whole review in the completion process. to avoid further questions coming back after the director's review.
Also, one more thing for pre-approved programs specifically, as I had mentioned before in my presentation, we have done a pre-approved map with the employer in advance to lay out the path that most students will follow. If the student has self-assessed themselves significantly higher than the map in areas where they've self-assessed themselves at a level 2, where the map was at a level 1 target proficiency, the reviewer will usually bring it down as that was not part of the map. Most of the times the student is still able to meet the exit requirements, but if it is higher than the map, then the reviewer will bring it down.
And on a similar note, this question has come up a few times. If a supervisor and a mentor have already agreed with the student's competency and their self-assessed level, why would the profession challenge that? So perhaps the role of a supervisor and mentor.
So the role of a supervisor is to verify the factual accuracy of your work. They are actually not providing any input on your competencies, technical or enabling. What we require them to do is to read the description of the task that you've provided and verify that it's factually accurate. It is great if you have a supervisor who you're working with to run your competencies with them, but there's actually not any reliance placed on their verification except for the factual accuracy component. A mentor is mostly there to guide you with your enabling competencies. If the mentor has usually given their opinion that you have met the enabling competencies, we do place reliance on that. All mentors are not required to review your technical competencies. They can, and they can definitely provide guidance. But again, it is in a guidance perspective and not that something that we can rely on for all reports.
And just one thing to add to that, when your supervisor is looking at your report, they actually don't see how you've self-assessed your proficiency level. They see your comments, but they don't see whether you've assessed yourself as a level 1 or a level 2. So when they're saying agreed at the bottom, they aren't actually agreeing to your proficiency. They're agreeing to your documentation being correct to their understanding.
All right, and back to mentor review requirements. Are we required to have, or I guess you should say, how long after the PERT report is completed, after the self-assessment of their competencies is completed, does the mentor review need to take place? Is it tied to a certain time after the report or from the per effective date?
The technical requirement is that you need to have mentor meetings semi-annually, every 6 months, 2 meetings for every 12 months of your current experience. However, best practice is that you would complete your experience report. If you are an experience verification student, get it verified by your supervisor, and then have a mentor meeting within a reasonable amount of time to discuss your report and your enabling competencies. So it should technically be happening in the same cycle. When you do your experience report every 6 months, it should be the next step to discuss it with your mentor.
All right, and again, off of the supervisor and mentor questions, do both of these individuals need to be a CPA?
No, they do not both need to be a CPA. The mentor needs to be a CPA. The supervisor does not.
All right. And as for the mentor meetings, can they be done via phone or do they have to be done face-to-face?
They do not have to be done face-to-face in this day and age. The meetings can happen any which way that both the student and the mentor prefer. They can be done on the phone, they can be done via Skype, they can be done in any electronic way that you guys prefer and you can do.
And in terms of mentors, can I change my mentor throughout my practical experience process? And also, if I can't find a mentor, what should I do?
Yes, you can change a mentor throughout your process. We do recommend that unless there is a reason for you to end your mentor relationship, you do stay with the same mentor. But if you want to end the relationship, so for instance, you're leaving a pre-approved program, things are just not working out, you are able to end your relationship with your mentor at any point during your practical experience. So the other part of the question was what to do if you cannot find a mentor. It could be that your mentor has not registered yet, or you do not have their right email address. If you cannot find your mentor, I would suggest contacting them to confirm the details. And if not, you can email us at practicalexperience@cpaontario.ca, and we should be able to help you with that.
Yeah, and I think the way that you just responded was more so if they are a pre-program student and they know who their mentor is, but they can't find it. And I guess the other side of it would be for EBR students who just can't even find a mentor that they need, that there is a way to match.
Yes, we do have a mentor match portal. You do have to email us and let us know that you are looking for a mentor, and we should be able to assist you find a mentor with certain things that would match your experience, your location, etc. We should be able to find a good match for you. So we are at the end of our practical experience completion presentation. Thank you so much for logging in, and thank you so much for your questions, and have a great day.